Welcome into this week's episode of Your Drone Questions Answered, brought to you by Drone Launch Academy. I'm your host, Chris Breedlove. Today's question is this, and a really fun one, I might add. How are consumer drones being used for cutting edge science? So, to help us unpack that question, really share some really fascinating stories, I'm excited to welcome as my guest this week, Josh Matheson from Duke University. Josh, thanks for joining the show, man.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
So, Josh, tell our listeners a little about your background, what you're doing at Duke, and maybe your other kind of aviation and drone experiences that led you to this point.
Yeah, I got my start in aviation quite a few years ago when I was in the Air Force. I was a jet engine mechanic. I worked on a variety of platforms from the B-1 to the F-16 to the F-15. So did a lot of engine work, building them, and then working on the flight line around the jets. And so that kind of got my foot into the door for like aviation. And then I kind of did a hard pivot. So I went back to school and I got my undergrad degree in GIS and remote sensing and did a hard pivot and started kind of looking at conservation and restoration work and got my start at the Nature Center. And I was getting ready to use my shiny new degree to do all this GIS and data work and realized like it was really hard to do it on such a small scale, like a nature center. And I was like, if only like I could collect my own data. And I wrote a little white paper. I was able to get a little bit of funding to get my first drone and built my own drone program for the nature center and started incorporating that with some of the land management practices that we were using. And it worked really well. And that kind of steered me to my next endeavor, which was a land manager at a land trust, where I provided the same kind of services. I built a drone program. They had the cache right there. I was able to use the drone techniques to kind of survey the land and look at conservation easements. And then that finally, led me to my next position at Duke University, working in Jay Johnston's lab, which is called the Marine Robotics and Remote Sensing Lab. And I got brought on as a research technician. I like to think that I have one of the best jobs on campus. I kind of get to do a little bit of everything. I do a little bit of the engineering side of things, as well as I get to be an instructor and I get to work with students and train students to be drone pilots and kind of get brought in on their projects and what they're interested in. And hopefully we could talk about that a little bit later. And then I get to work for the lab as well. So we have clients that we work for and we provide drone services for them. So I get to kind of dabble in a little bit of everything, which means I get to use a lot of different types of drones. And I go all over the place, east to west, north to south. And hopefully we can share a little bit about that. So
Absolutely. Josh, you guys obviously, I mean, I say obviously, I know listeners will now know y'all build some of your own systems. Y'all certainly customize things. I use a lot of enterprise equipment. If I can name certain names like EBs and Wingtra and FreeFly and so on. But for today, we're really going to try to focus on really neat science that y'all have done and supported with actually pretty accessible, like entry level or consumer prosumer grade drones. What do you want to say about that? What are we talking about as far as consumer entry level drones? Maybe you want to talk about models or characteristics of those types of drones and how y'all are using that type of technology.
I think it's interesting to kind of go back a little bit and talk about like the origins of the lab. It was founded by Dave Johnston about 10 years ago. And, around the 2015 timeframe. And if anyone can remember back then, this is the battle of, maybe like the solo 3DR versus, the Phantom. And like, drones were kind of really just hitting the market. And there was an engineer part of the lab called Julian Dale. And he was phenomenal. And he just had this mind where he was able to kind of build and 3D print the booms and like put these drones together and make our own that kind of suffice for the science that we wanted to do. And then as, manufacturers got better at making drones for consumers and stuff, the lab kind of pivoted and we started working with like the EBs, then the free flies and, DJI. And so it kind of continued to build out from there. Now the technology can fit in the palm of your hand. You have some of these really small consumer drones that pack a lot of features that allow us to do incredibly cool science that probably really wasn't possible, maybe 10 years ago. You would have a much larger drone that was built, a lot of wiring, wasn't, IP rated out of the box to some degree. So, that we definitely had our limitations. And now you can have something, as small as like a mini that has, really, really incredible flight time for the size of it. So our lab has transitioned. We still have really awesome, incredibly, complex drone systems like DJI Matrice 350s. We have Wingtras, we still have EBs, we have Free Fly Astros, and we still use those quite a bit. But we also have a whole other side of the lab that focuses more on the use of consumer drones. Kind of going back just a little bit, like we really started using the Phantoms as one of our primary workhorse drones for a lot of the work we were doing. And sometimes like these out of the box drones were close but not perfect. And that's when our engineer kind of really came through, that he was able to come up with solutions that gently modify the drones to make them usable by science community members. And I think that's kind of the transition the lab is going from building what we needed to slowly being able to modify the drones to kind of fit it. And now some of them are just ready to go out of the box for the work we do.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we've got, I think, about 6 different stories or areas of research. We got elephants, we got sharks and with AIs, we've got seals, we've got 2 different whale stories, I believe, and then oyster reef modeling. So tackle those either in that order if you want or however you want to jump into it, man. But I'm excited to hear how all this is kind of coming to bear.
I truly feel like I have one of the best jobs ever, and part of that is, the diversity of work that I get to do. And so a lot of times that comes about when you have a student that has, interest in a project and you start collaborating and you work on this. And so some of these are student ventures that I'm going to talk about and just some really incredible work. So one of my favorites, because one part of my job is also instructing and training, is a student by the name of Mishka, and she was already over in Africa doing incredible work with elephants in Zambia. And she wanted to start incorporating drones to collect data on elephants, both behavioral and to be able to fly above them and, take measurements of the different elephants. And she had no background in drones, and so trying to train it. And so I will admit at one point there was me out in the field walking around pretending to be an elephant and being able to have her go fly over top of me, get lined up with the gimbal all in one smooth motion and take the shot and then move on. So that was kind of fun to build out that exercise. I did have another student, looking at sea turtles with thermal and hiding a little hot plate that heated up with a heat gun in the middle of the night out in the field. Cool enough, but like you can still pick it up on the thermal camera, just a little bit of a heat signature to help train these out. So I get to come up with creative ways to get them ready for what they're actually going to be experiencing in the field. So with the elephants in Zambia, the student Mishka, she was able to use a Phantom 4, I believe, and a Mavic 3. And what we were able to do is our engineer actually outfitted them with just a little laser altimeter. And what that allows us to do is we get that precise distancing from the drone to whatever subject we're actually taking a picture of. And so once we know that distancing and we know the gimbal pitch angle and we know the size of the sensor, it just becomes math, right? To be able to calculate the size, the length, the width of these animals. And that can tell us a lot. And so these incredible researchers are using these ratios to understand elephant health and body condition. They're able to track all these elephants. They can build this catalog because, in some of the more traditional practices, it's setting up camera traps, on trees or other things and hoping that the elephant walks by them and that you get a clean shot and you don't know till you go and check your traps. And it takes a lot of time. And now we have the student using this powerful tool that's very cost effective and able to go and actually find the elephants, get the data that she needs for her research.
Wow. So you're saying that the altimeter being added to whether it was the Phantom or the Mavic, without that, I guess you really couldn't have made measurements with any validity whatsoever. Would the alternative been to use maybe a higher grade drone or maybe even a Phantom and actually have to stitch, do photogrammetry, right? Before you could take any measurements, maybe. But that means you have to waste time maybe overflying, right? Taking a bunch of other pictures you don't. Yeah. Was that really the challenge, I guess, to not have to take so much,
Right.
do so much mapping or modeling?
And yeah, there's probably other ways to go about it. You could always put like a GCP or something in the shot, something that's a known measurement. But a lot of times you're working in these like far reach places that's not always possible to put out these targets or whatever that kind of help tie things together. With just the, sensors and stuff on the drone itself, like it's a little too coarse of a measurement to really get it accurate. And so when you're talking about the conditions of an elephant and like maybe 10 centimeters could make the difference between a healthy elephant's waist, width and one that may be underfed, it makes a difference. And so having that precise measurements allows us to just do better science.
Yeah. So that's number 1. Number 2 then, so shark, and I guess you have shark videos and AI modeling. So tell us that story, Josh.
Yeah, really impressive student, Maya Griffith. She came in and she was interested in sharks and she was interested in shark behavior. And there's been so much incredible work being done with AI. And so she's like, let's go get some, shark data. So we went through the training process and I believe she was using the Mavic 3 Classic because that's all she needed. And I believe she shot video in 4K, but I think she ended up downgrading the video a bit to 1080 just to work with the software. And she just went out to the local Rachel Carson Reserve, got the permission, and just flew up and down the beach and was able to collect all this amazing shark video and then come back into the lab, take that video And then she was able to kind of build her AI models. And so what she was looking at is with the videos, could it actually track the shark, have a node on the head, a tail, the dorsal fin, and like, will the things actually place the nodes in the right places on the shark? And then from there, they can kind of interpret like how the shark is moving, right? And then you can start to do the science. And so once again, you can do it with other forms. You can do it with an aircraft, which is expensive. And, some days you go out and there's nothing. And so that's a lot of work and prep for a no return. And with the drone, she was able to have probably the cheapest available model of Mavic 3. We got a dry bag and a case, and she was able to kayak over from Duke University Marine Lab. So it's like a 10-minute kayak over, set up on the beach, and fly and collect data every day to build out that data set. Because with the AI, you have to have a lot of different videos to really help with the training. Being able to collect data day after day was really actually quite easy. So she was able to have pretty good success with all her models. It was all done with the Mavic 3.
Yeah. That's incredible, and I guess the thing with this isn't $30,000 equipment necessarily. Y'all own that kinda stuff, like you said, y'all have that the high level enterprise. There's a time and a place for that, but
Right.
that's pretty cool. But I've heard other educators say, we don't wanna spend 200 grand on something, and then we have students come in for a 12-week semester. It's a little bit risky, right, at that time. So
Right.
give them something that's a little, I shouldn't say disposable, but more forgiving maybe, and more accessible, less intimidating, all those sorts of things, so
Right. And, that's one of the things we talk about a lot when we're going through training, instruction is thinking about drones as tools. Not all drones are just the multi-tool that be all fix all. Each one kind of has a purpose and a place. And there's a time to use an Astro, with a nice LR1 payload and high res. And there's a time to use a Mavic or consumer sized drone and knowing the difference. And so we talk about like noise pollution and animal disturbance. And are you modifying the behavior of the subject that you're trying to collect data on? And so sometimes, even though you can get the better resolution, maybe have a free fly, it's too noisy and you're modifying the animal's behavior that then obviously corrupts a little bit of the science that you're trying to do. With the commercial side, it actually has benefits that maybe these larger, more expensive drones don't have. And a lot of our students are even doing work to figure out how noisy is a Mavic, how noisy is a Mini, like, and does that give us the data that we need? Is it good enough? And also provide like that natural state of an elephant or a seal or a shark. Thinking about these things, and they've just been picking it up and they're really incredible at thinking about the tools we have as a lab and not just one drone to fix all.
yeah. Harbor seals, please g
Harbor seals, same layout. Ambitious student Maddie Paris says, I want to do seals. As a lab, we also are doing seals. I just got back from Alaska doing seal work. We were using the Astro Free Fly and got some incredible footage and stuff, but each population is a bit different. And so she's like, the ones that I'm studying in Virginia, they're very skittish. And so having a quiet drone, also, being able to take the equipment up, she's not going to have a lot of space to like multiple big pellet cases. We talked about it and we decided on the Mavic 3 Pro with the zoom lens. And so she's looking at not only just taking photographs, we talked about photogrammetry, we talked about measurements, but she's really interested in circling around the seals to try to create these 3D models. So she's interested, can you answer the question of, can you get a 3D model? Can you do volumetrics on a seal? And so she's interested in trying to perform that task. And so no better drone than something small, light, and stable that can really hold that position in the camera and smooth data collection all around. Being so small kind of goes a bit unknown. So it's a little bit easier. Hopefully she'll have less modified behavior from the seals. This is something that we're working on and training for right now. But with any luck, like, we should have some really good results. And then she'll take that data and she'll be able to run it through a number of different softwares to try to see which one is the best fit to try to create these 3D models.
Yeah. Okay, humpback whales and photogrammetry.
Like I said, we work with students, but we also work with clients and we do collaborations with other universities. And so I had the privilege back in late January, early February to do a collaboration trip with the University of Miami and Stanford University and East Santa Cruz. We're all going down to Antarctica to study humpback whales and other whales in the area. And so this is where, once again, you think about tools, you think about data collection, you think about science, and you're going down there and you're going to put tags on whales that can, track them, the movements on the water. There's cameras on them. They're going to be taking biopsy samples of the whales. But then you add in the drone component, right? And so you can tie all these metrics together to get a better understanding and pictures what these animals' lives are like, what's going on with them. And so we were able to take down a variety of drones. So we actually took down the Freefly Astro with the LR1 61 megapixel payload and got some incredible shots of whales. But honestly, it was the DJI Mavic 3 Pros that we took down that kind of really seemed to be our go-to drone because it's a small case. You're operating these tiny Zodiac boats. So, real estate is key when you're in these tiny boats for setup and, doing hand launches and recoveries. The Mavics were just so easy to set up and quick to set up and quick to get in the air because you would just be going along until you see the blow from the whale off in the distance. And then, it's go time. And so being able to have something that was light and portable and quick to set up and quick to get in the air was just invaluable. And so we got so much excellent data of these humpback whales just by using these consumer drones. We definitely took other stuff. Free Fire was fantastic. We got some incredible imagery, but once again, limiting space, multiple pelly cases in the boat. And yeah, we just got really used to using the Mavericks because they were so great. And once again, it's the right tool for the job. With a lot of times when you're doing measurements, you don't need the highest, crispest, clearest resolution. You just need to understand where the whale ends and begins, and the Mavic was perfect for that. And so we were able to get incredible stuff. And I got this opportunity to fly over a giant pod of killer whales, orcas that were going through. And it was just absolutely phenomenal to get some footage of behavior. It was a good drone. So
That's incredible.
I guess if we're talking about whales, and once again, I'll just bring it up, my boss, Dave Johnston, who, is the director of the lab, is a marine mammals person, and he's the one tying this technology to this research. A lot of the work we do at the Duke Marine Lab is, marine mammal focused. And so I had another student doing her PhD, Annie Harshberger, and she, she's a pilot and she's been collecting data, and she was nice enough to let me come on one of her research cruises as an alternative pilot. Because when you're flying all day, it's nice to be able to alternate pilots and take breaks. And also, she's running the entire scientific cruise. So she has a lot of responsibilities, not to just data collection, but she was nice enough and trusted me to collect some of her data for her PhD. So similar to the humpback whales and stuff where we're taking pictures over them, but she's also using it to collect behavioral stuff. So she's interested in how these pilot whales interact with one another, relationships. So kind of tying together some of the photogrammetry stuff, but then also some of the stuff like Maya's doing. So taking the video versus the still images and looking at behaviors. There's multiple tools to the things that not only can take measurements and all that, but they can also look at behavioral changes. So,
Gotcha. And Oyster reef modeling, tell us about that and what's being used for that task.
yes. So this is one of the projects that I got brought in right when I took the position at Duke University. And it was one of the main people running it that used to work for the lab was Justin Ridge, and now he's working for the NEARS here. And so his background and his specialties is oyster reefs. And so he was interested in using drones to see if we could use drones not to replace, but to supplement traditional practices of oyster reef sampling. So like looking at the reef, understanding how healthy the reef is, how much is being harvested. Is it too much? Is it not enough? Understanding everything, the volume of it, how much is there. You would have to go up with a boat, stomp around, you take your measurements, you collect it. And so he was wondering, could you do this, collect the same amount of data with a drone and do it faster? One of the big projects we were working on is using a Phantom 4 RTK to do a lot of the work. And I think they had another Phantom 4 as well to pretty much fly these really low, slow surveys of these oyster reefs because they're not large, but there's multiple ones. And then being able to not only do not photogrammetry, but to do like these orthomosaic and 3D models to understand volume and look at rugosity of the oyster shells and try to get a better understanding of like, can this be a valuable tool? Because we know how important oyster reefs are to the local. You live here, I live here. We know the role they play in the ecosystem and cleaning the water and, providing habitat. And so being able to understand these and collect data in real time and then being able to get these findings out there quicker than the traditional methods. So hopefully things can be put in effect to help protect these oyster reefs is a lot of work that he's doing. And so, we've played around with the more expensive drones and using LiDAR and stuff on the oyster reefs to kind of see how it compares, but they've gotten some really good results. And then not only are they able to do it here, but it's a larger collaboration project with not only North Carolina, but South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, all these places that have oyster reefs that, have similar practices, that have people monitoring them. It's a group collaboration effort. And then one of the things they looked at was, well, what kind of drone do we use? If you have this big, expensive drone, not everyone may be able to participate. And so by doing the research, doing the science, and making the conscious effort to use a drone that's affordable, and accessible, now you have science that lots of people can contribute to, and you have uniformity across the board. So that way you don't have one person using a really expensive drone to collect their data and somebody using something really cheap, and you have this mismatch and like the science just doesn't shake out in the end. Having this uniformity, saying that it's available to everyone, and then taking that workflow and being able to provide it to other like nonprofit and government organizations, saying you too can monitor your oyster reefs using this workflow with an affordable solution. And so it's incredible work that they're doing. And it's something that I like because it just shakes up a little bit of the marine mammal stuff that we're doing. So I think oyster reefs and elephants really, shake up my day to day. Key things we're getting to, I guess, status quo of yeah, whales, day in and day out, just so boring, I guess. No, I'm joking. It's fantastic.
No, it's awesome. What would be that overarching takeaway of maybe folks are listening, oh, I'm going to do research like this too, or maybe I already have a Mavic Pro or Classic or a Phantom. I didn't know it could be usable in these areas. What would you say, kind of just a parting shot along those lines?
I would say two things. One is if there's not a solution right now, give it 5 minutes. The great thing about working in the tech world is the turnover is just so fast paced. So it seems like every year new drones are coming out. So stand by. I'll say two, get creative, right? You may not have the solution in a single box, but you might have the solution in a couple boxes. And so get creative in how you approach the problems, right? So if you have a drone and it's almost the right fit, look at other products, look at other add-ons that you could potentially put onto it to help supplement to kind of get there over the edge. So if you have a drone and you're like, I'd really like to map with it, but like this doesn't have the capability of mapping, look at a third-party app, see if there's anything out there. If it doesn't have the accuracy you want, look at a potential RTK module that could be installed. Think about doing it collaboratively because it may not be all in one. That's something we really battled with as a drone lab is not having that perfect science drone, right? There's no company out there that I know that's like geared only towards the science community and nobody else. There's definitely companies out there doing wonderful things to help us as a community, to help us build out solutions to kind of get where we want to go in the end. And it's much appreciated and we're getting there. But a lot of it is kind of piecing together from multiple sources. And so, yeah, don't give up, get creative. There's lots of good resources online. There's really clever people out there finding excellent workarounds. I love going through like community forums and seeing what other people have come up with and workarounds. So give it time, bundle things together, and be creative.
No, I love that. So, Josh, to kind of wrap all this up, where can folks find more if that's the lab website or somewhere else to check out if there is any? I assume this stuff is published in various ways, but how can folks learn more and just be like, man, this is really neat?
So my boss, Dave Johnston, the director of the lab, has a lot of publications. So you can find all his publications on Google Scholar and see the research that we do, which is incredible. And then you can also visit marineuas.net, MARINEUAS.net. That's our lab's webpage. And you can see some of our research and contact info. And there's email stuff to reach out if you have any questions or just curious to learn more.
Awesome. That's perfect. Well, Josh, man, thanks so much for joining. This is really fascinating. All these are fascinating. All these are fun to do, but some are a little more outside the box and creative and the others. And this is definitely one of those. So thank you. Thanks for all your time, man. To our listeners, as always, you got a question you want us to tackle on this show, please drop me an email at chris@dronelaunchacademy.com or visit ydqa.io. Submit your questions there. Until next time, have a great week.